There's a moment a lot of men know. Someone asks how you're doing, and you say, "I'm fine." Not because you are, and not because you're trying to lie. The answer just comes out, almost automatically, like something inside you made the decision first. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because the question isn't really why men don't talk about how they feel. It's not that men don't feel things. Most of them do, more than people realize. The question is, why does something happen between the feeling and the words? Why does a man know exactly that something's wrong and still say, "I'm good"? And the more I looked into this, the more I realized it isn't really about weakness. It isn't about not caring. And it definitely isn't about men having no emotions. The answer goes back much further. Back to something most of us started learning long before we had any say in it. And once you see how it works, it's hard to unsee. I came across a comment once that stuck with me. A guy wrote about a moment most men will probably recognize. His wife asked what was wrong. He knew exactly what was wrong, had known for weeks, and he still said, "Nothing, I'm tired." Not to deceive her, not because he didn't care, just because that was the answer that came out before he'd even decided. And what got me wasn't the story, it was the replies. Hundreds of men responding with some version of the same thing. Not, "I relate to that," just, "Yeah, same, I've done that." And that's when I started wondering if most people misunderstand what this actually looks like. Because when people hear emotional shutdown, they imagine someone deliberately hiding something, keeping secrets, refusing to talk. But most of the time, it doesn't feel like that at all. It doesn't feel like hiding. It doesn't even feel like a decision. The question arrives, and somehow, the answer is already there before you've had a chance to look any deeper. Maybe you've been that guy. Work has been stressful. Something with the kids has been weighing on you. You haven't slept properly in weeks. Someone asks how you're doing, and you say, "I'm good, just busy." And the strange part is, you mean it, at least in that moment. You genuinely mean it. That's the part that surprised me most when I started looking into this. It's not always that men don't want to talk. Sometimes they genuinely can't access what they're feeling clearly enough to put it into words. Not because it isn't there, but because something learned a long time ago keeps getting in the way. So I started looking into whether this was actually as common as it seemed, and what I found was pretty surprising. There's a researcher named Ronald Levant who spent years studying this exact question, and he came up with a term that explains a lot. Normative male alexithymia. Sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. A lot of men struggle to identify and describe what they're feeling. Not because they were born that way, because they learned it. The more I read about it, the more familiar it started to sound. Boys are often taught very early which emotions are acceptable and which ones aren't. Anger? Usually okay. Confidence? Usually okay. But fear, sadness, hurt, vulnerability? Those tend to get a different response. Maybe nobody says it directly, but the message still gets through. And after enough years, you stop paying attention to certain signals. Not because they disappear, just because you stop listening to them. Then I came across the work of John Gottman, and this part surprised me even more. He found that during emotionally intense conversations, many men become physiologically overwhelmed much faster than people realize. Heart rate goes up, stress hormones spike, the body starts preparing for a threat. And once that happens, finding the right words becomes a lot harder. Gottman called this flooding. And the strange thing is, from the outside, it can look like someone doesn't care, like they're pulling away, like they've checked out. But internally, something very different might be happening. The system is overloaded, and the person is trying to get through it. I remember thinking about how many times I've heard men say things like, "I don't know, I just shut down, I couldn't find the words." And for the first time, those answers started sounding different. Less like excuses and more like clues. Because if Levant explains why some men struggle to access what they're feeling, and Gottman explains why they lose access to it under pressure, there's still one piece missing, the piece that teaches men to do this in the first place. And I think it might be the most important one. So where does this actually come from? Because understanding Levant and Gottman helps explain what happens, but it still doesn't fully explain why so many men learn this pattern in the first place. I came across an idea in psychology that helped me make sense of it. It's called gender role strain. The name sounds complicated. The idea isn't. Every culture has an unwritten rule book for what a man is supposed to be: strong, capable, reliable, in control. And most boys start picking up those rules long before they realize they're learning them. Not from one conversation, not from one person, just from life. The kid who gets laughed at for crying, the teenager who opens up and immediately regrets it, the young man who notices people respond better when he looks confident than when he looks uncertain. None of these moments feel important on their own, but they add up, and eventually, the lesson starts to feel obvious. Keep certain things to yourself. Nobody has to sit a boy down and teach him how to shut down emotionally. It happens automatically, one small adjustment at a time, until it stops feeling like something he's doing and starts feeling like who he is. A therapist named Terrence Real spent years working with men who looked completely fine from the outside. And what he found underneath was that many of them were carrying far more than anyone around them realized, including themselves. The feeling was still there, it just stopped being visible, even to the person carrying it. Because somewhere along the way, showing certain emotions started to feel risky, not dangerous, just uncomfortable enough, often enough, that keeping them inside started to feel easier. And after enough years, easier becomes automatic. So what actually happens when this becomes a pattern? Most people imagine something dramatic, a breakdown, a crisis. But that's rarely how it works. The consequences are usually much quieter than that. They show up in the gaps. The conversation that never quite happened. The partner who slowly starts feeling like they're talking to a wall. The friendship that fades because neither person ever got past the surface. The doctor's appointment that keeps getting postponed. Nobody crashes. Life just keeps moving. But underneath it, something stays unresolved, year after year. And I kept thinking about something a therapist once said. The men he worked with weren't broken, they were exhausted. Because carrying something you can't fully see or name or explain takes a surprising amount of energy. Emotional shutdown isn't usually painful in an obvious way. It feels more like a tiredness that never quite leaves. A sense that something important is just out of reach. Not enough to create a crisis, just enough to quietly shape everything. So what actually helps? This isn't the kind of thing you solve in a weekend. But the more I looked into this, the more a few patterns kept showing up. The first one is the simplest. Next time someone asks how you're doing, pause for 1 second before you answer, just to actually check. Because for a lot of men, the answer comes out before they've even looked inside. That 1 second is the beginning of reconnecting those two things. The second thing is about lowering the bar for honesty. A lot of men are waiting for the perfect moment to finally say something real. It never comes. So instead, try saying something slightly more accurate than you normally would. Honestly, it's been a heavy few weeks. I'm not sure I have it figured out. Small things, but they start rebuilding the connection between what's happening inside and what you actually say. And the third thing, when you notice yourself shutting down, step away for 20 minutes. Not to avoid the conversation, to let your nervous system come back down. Gottman found that the body needs time to get out of flooding. Forcing yourself to talk while overwhelmed almost never works. Coming back 20 minutes later usually does. None of this is dramatic, just small adjustments, one at a time. That's usually how something this deep starts to shift. Here's the thing that stays with me. Most men who shut down emotionally aren't doing it on purpose. They're not cold. They're not broken. They learned something a very long time ago, that certain feelings were safer kept inside. and they got very good at it. So good that eventually they stopped noticing they were doing it at all. What if the problem isn't that he won't open up? What if it's that somewhere along the way, he genuinely forgot how? Not empty rooms, not dramatic breakdowns, just ordinary men going through ordinary days, carrying something they can't quite see, or name, or explain, but know is there anyway. If any part of this felt familiar, I'd genuinely be curious to hear about it. What does this look like in your life? Everything we talked about today doesn't happen in isolation. It shows up in how men connect, or don't, in how they feel seen, or don't. That's a whole other conversation. But it starts exactly here.